Okay, so we are on D2 now, and D2 says critically review and evaluate the use of appropriate legal advice, legal solutions in comparison to legal advice. So, legal solutions in comparison to legal advice. Critically review and evaluate. So, we've got two situations using the case scenario. The first situation is with ABS and Dean Limited. And now ABS and Dean Limited, you've already established, a breach of special condition and frustration, which had discharged the contract. And you've already established and used in M3 and M4 that, and also P4, that you wouldn't pay ABS any money because of Cutter versus Powell 1795, even if you took into consideration substantial performance. Substantial performance in terms of Hoeing versus Isaacs 1952. But, you are in a right position not to pay ABS any money, legally. But from a business perspective, and I know you don't want to pay ABS any money. But, sometimes you've got to look at the long term, and you've got to say to yourself, well, how valuable is this person to the industry and to your company? Because if he's not very valuable at all, then your argument holds a lot of water. But if he is quite valuable to the industry and he's a recognised name and IT guy and so on and so forth, you might want to consider an alternative. In addition to that, you've got to take into consideration the negative publicity you might get. Negative publicity you might get for all the work he's completed, 99%. And even though you're legally correct, you might get the public sympathy. On the other hand, who says, hang on a minute, this is just not fair, even though the law is on your side. Okay, so that's only something that you need to consider there. But again, everything points to you, not paying ABS, but part of you might say that you want to pay ABS, but at the same time you can't from a business perspective because you need all the money you've got. And already the banks are calling on Dean Limited, and already Dean Limited can't pay their interest charges. So if they can't even pay the interest charges to the bank, why would they want to fork out money that they don't really have? Yeah? So that's one situation, so bring that in. The other situation is in P6, we looked at Craig and Sadie Couture Limited and AAD Fashion House. And you established that there was a legally binding arbitration agreement, correctly communicated in writing that both parties had, and so it was valid. And you quite correctly quoted various cases in New York Convention 1958, Arab African Energy Corp versus Netherlands BV, correctly, to support the arbitration agreement. So the question is, they have to go to arbitration, but what arbitration should you use? Ad hoc or institutional? On one hand, you could go for ad hoc because it's cheaper, it's faster, it's quick. There are not many suppliers, and you have to deal with these suppliers. Let's try and get it to work out. However, on the other side of the coin, you need to bring in things like the fact that they lost an order for £300,000 in the case study assignment. So, how much profit do you think that order would be? If they lost an order for £300,000, how much profit do you think they've lost? At least £100,000 to £150,000 they've lost, I would say, a profit. Working on 50% gross margin to 100% on top. And we're looking at gross profit, not net profit, less the expenses. So we're saying to ourselves that if you take off the cost of the material, in terms of gross profit and cost of goods sold, then they would have lost at least £100,000 to £150,000. So even if the institutional arbitration is more expensive, 20 grand, well, maybe it's worth the risk. It's worth the risk because if you go to arbitration and sort this out, you want a long-term partnership anyway. You want a long-term partnership with this fashion house because there are not many fashion houses that can supply that material in the first place. But also you want to sort it out just in case you needed to take them to court. Because if you lose another order, then you're going to need to take them to court. And if you go to court and you use ad hoc arbitration, the judge could say to you, hasn't been conducted correctly. and it's not worth that arbitration the paper's written on. So go away and do the arbitration again correctly. So to have that kind of like risk behind you, I personally wouldn't like that if I was in the business, and I would say perhaps go for institutional arbitration because of the money that you lost before, the profit, and you're going to lose more in the future if you don't take these steps. Okay? Anyone have anything to add to this?
No.
Okay, so when it says critically review, so look at the advantages and disadvantages of the situation with ABS and Dean Limited, and then give your opinion, and then say what is going to be your legal advice. And then with P6, with Craig and Sadie Couture Limited and AAD Fashion House, again give the pros and cons between ad hoc and institutional arbitration, which you've kind of already done before, but then go through the whole process in terms of how much money they lost, how much profit they could lose in terms of gross profit, and then say, is it worthwhile doing ad hoc of the money sales they could lose in the future if the situation arises again? Because remember, they failed to deliver twice, on the 20th of Feb and the 28th of March. So, these things, and using the case study and the case assignment to help you answer the question and to get your D2. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Many thanks.
Welcome.